Venerable Pend Hodder, founder of the Karuna Hospital for the Care of the Dying in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, conducted interviews with famous Tibetan lamas such as the Dalai Lama. The 14th Lama, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, Kyrgyz Tsenshab Rinpoche, Garj Kamtol Rinpoche, and Geshe-lam Rinpa, who are qualified to speak about the human process of dying, and rebirth. The interview was conducted in May 1995 in Dharamsala Province, Northern India. Help for the dying. Question: please tell us the best way for relatives to help the dying and the recently deceased. Dalai Lama: when meeting a dying person, absolutely avoid disturbing them. Especially do not make them angry or cry so that they become attached. On the contrary, we must remind them to practice at the last moment, such as visualizing images of Buddhas, virtuous teachers, Jesus, or some teaching according to their beliefs. If the person does not follow any religion, they should be helped to die in peace and quiet. When that person becomes unconscious, if he is a practitioner, he should remind him of the Dharma that he practices every day, especially when he is about to leave. Next, chant prayers. If relatives want the best for the dying person, they can recite the chant themselves or invite monks to come home to pray for them. In case there are no monks to guide the deceased, family members can recite the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, or other mantras they know, to guide the deceased. After the funeral, the family continues to observe and chant until the 49th day so that the soul can easily find a way to be reborn in a good world. Burial of the body depends on each culture or custom of the deceased. This is not very important, because once consciousness has escaped, the corpse is just like a pile of dirt. In a non-Buddhist village in southern India, their custom is to bury the body and then plant a tree on the grave. This is a way to end air pollution from firewood cremation, a common practice in India, while also avoiding the destruction of forests, a precious national resource. Family. This is a good method, although it is not as good as in the West where electricity is used for cremation. Garj Kamtol Rinpoche: for the dying and the recently deceased, the best way you can help is to generate your own compassion towards the dying person. Your love and compassion are very beneficial to the dying person, because it arises from your heart, making it easy for you to show him or her the unconditional compassion that the dying person so needs. Your true compassion will create a peaceful atmosphere for the dying person to think about their noble spiritual direction and their future path of practice. Another important thing is that you do not alienate and leave the dying person alone. Death is the truth and the most terrible fear for humans. Therefore, you should stay by their side, or hold their hand and say words of comfort, or look into their eyes with sympathy. The body also has its own love language. Use it and don't be afraid because you're afraid they're smelly, dirty, or afraid they'll take you with them. If you can show such affectionate gestures, you will bringing people who are about to die the greatest peace at the end of their lives. When you are sure that the person has died, you still maintain your boundless compassion and together with everyone around the deathbed. Chant loudly the names of Buddhas such as Shakyamuni Buddha, Amitabha Buddha, or others. Names of 35 Buddhas, etc. If you recite the Buddha's name with your boundless compassion, it will help the dying person take a step towards rebirth. Kyrgyz Tsenshab Rinpoche: there are two types of people to consider here. The first is people of faith. The second is a person who does not follow any particular religion. If the dying person is a Buddhist, we chant sutras and Buddha's name to help them reach salvation. If that person does not follow any religion, the best thing to help them is to advise them to think of good people and the best things in life. When a person is dying and in that moment of confusion, there is nothing better than giving them a feeling of peace and warmth. This feeling is very beneficial for their mind. I will explain in detail what to do to help these two categories of people. For Buddhists, we can remind them to dedicate themselves to what they once took refuge in and practiced. We can remind them of Bodhisattva, awakening the mind, purifying the mind and concentrating on meditation. This is very beneficial for a Buddhist. For people who are not religious, we can advise them to think, may everyone be happy, may all sentient beings be happy, may all sentient beings be free from their sufferings. Ideas that want goodness for others are very helpful to the dying. For Buddhists, when they are about to die, they should remind them of the merits of the Buddhas, remember the image of a certain Buddha, and maybe place a Buddha image in their room. This is very useful and helpful. Is a condition that helps souls to be reborn in Pure Land. Immediately after the person dies, it is very important to not touch their corpse so that the death process is not interrupted, which only ends in the bardo/intermediate state. Completely escape from the body. In Tibet, relatives must wait 48 hours before the funeral. Geshe-Lam Rinpa. In general, once it is determined that the person will die, it is important to fulfill all their wishes. If they appear to be always angry, what should we do to stop their anger and keep them in a peaceful state? You should avoid making noise and moving around frequently with that person. If the dying person is too attached to relatives, wife or husband, parents and children, it is best not to let these relatives near the deathbed. Try to do this to end the dying person's attachment. If it is certain that they will die, we should give them food and drink, things they require to please and satisfy them, even foods that are abstained during the treatment period. However, do not provide poisons and food that can be life-threatening. If we try to speak the Dharma to the dying but they do not like to listen, it is better not to speak, because this will cause them to have an aversion to the Dharma. If they think like that, in their next life they will not like being close to Buddhism. Similarly, if they like to eat and drink but you do not satisfy their desire, this makes them angry and causes them to fall into the realm of hungry ghosts. If a person believes in the help of others and is also someone who has helped others in this life, we should remind them of their good deeds and congratulate them on the good deeds they have done. This makes their minds happy and they will be reborn in a happy place. If we help the dying person's wishes come true, they will be very satisfied. This prevents the dying person's craving, anger, attachment and other wrong views from emerging, thus helping them not fall into a bad realm but be reborn in a good realm. For Buddhists and people who have practiced a certain Dharma, it would be advantageous if we could remind them of the 10 teachings of the Buddha before they die as follows. 1. You should not create thoughts of greed and attachment to all desires in this life. You should try and avoid directing your attachment to your loved ones, because even if we meet again in the next life, we will still have to separate. In the moment of death, we must leave everything behind. We should also not be attached to our body, because when we die we have to leave it. We do not regret things like food, clothes, or home, because those things eventually leave us. 2. We should develop compassion and love for all living beings. 3. We should eliminate all resentment and hatred, otherwise it will harm us in the next life. 4. If you have violated all the precepts that you have accepted and maintained, you must try to repent and purify them before death. 5. We must develop a strong mind in the future to accept and keep the pure precepts. 6. We must feel pain for the evil karma we have caused to others in this life and must repent to easily be reborn. 7. We must remember the merits that we have done in this life, the merits that others have done and develop the intention to continue to do so in the future. 8. We should think that it is time for us to leave for the next life. There is nothing to fear, because it is the natural law that there is birth and death. 9. You must contemplate that all phenomena are created by causes and conditions, and are also destroyed by causes and conditions. 10. We must contemplate that all phenomena are selfless, so that we can escape sadness and achieve peace. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. The best way to help the dying is to have our words and actions motivated by compassion. If possible, please invite a virtuous Lama to perform the transfer of consciousness for the dying. This practice is called Pawa in Tibetan, and is considered a particularly valuable and most effective practice to help the dying. You visualize the Buddha image above the head of the dying person. Visualize rays of light shining on the person about to die, cleansing their being, and visualize them dissolving into light, merging with the light of the Buddhas. Whether or not the transfer of consciousness is successful depends on the meditation strength of the person doing this practice. This special practice is not only for the dying but can also help purify and heal illnesses. For the living, lamas often use this method to pray for the longevity of the elderly and weak. Some teachers believe that the method of transferring consciousness should be performed in the pause between inhalation and exhalation. Many other people say that this dharma should be received and maintained as much as possible after the person dies, to protect their intermediate body for easy rebirth. According to Lut Tong teachings, the body should be cremated as soon as possible after death. But according to Tantra, it is best not to move the body within 3 days after death. Question: people who are about to die are in great physical pain and are frightened by the fear of death. What is the best method to help them overcome that fear? Garge Kamtol Rinpoche, in the West. People often use opium or sedatives to reduce the physical pain of the dying and help them die in peace. However, according to Buddhism, people need to die fully consciously, with as much self-control and alertness as possible. Therefore, it is necessary to control pain so that it cannot cloud the consciousness of the dying person, which is the essential condition for reducing physical pain. Second, what can be done to help the dying overcome the fear of death? First of all, you must be very calm and you must also overcome that fear when helping the dying. You need to pay attention to each of your own reactions, because your reaction will be reflected on the other person's reaction. Dying person and whether it will greatly contribute to their comfort or their destruction. When reciting the Buddha's name, you need to pay attention to reassuring the dying person that in these last moments, they will face countless different terrifying scenes that they have never known for a long time, and that makes them miserable. They were extremely scared. However, you must make sure that those illusions are not real, they are just products of the dying person's hallucinations. If you can give them a Mani pearl necklace or a string of beads from virtuous teachers, it will help them overcome fear. The beads here are a symbol of the teacher's ability. Question: for people who are not Buddhists or do not follow any religion, what should we do to help them? Garge Kamtol Rinpoche: for someone who does not believe or know nothing about Buddhism, show them the Mani gem as well as comfort and explain to them the macabre scenes they are about to see in a moment, just illusions and dreams, not real. Thanks to this advance warning, they will overcome the fear of dying. When does a person's consciousness leave the body? Question: in the West, the usual signs of death are cessation of breathing and cardiac arrest. According to Buddhism, how does this happen? Kyuri Tsenshab Rinpoche: perhaps there are 2 types of people to consider here. First, young people or people who have been waiting to die for a long time. This type of person's consciousness is very subtle and their consciousness will not stay in the body for long, maybe only a day. Second, for people who are healthy and die quickly, their consciousness stays in the body for up to 3 days. Other deaths include sudden death, death due to accident or violence. For example, if 2 people fight and slash each other and one of them dies suddenly, their consciousness does not stay in the body for long. In general, people, depending on how heavy or light their consciousness is, can escape from the body after death. Geshe Lam Rinpa: when the breath stops and the heart stops beating, it clearly indicates that the gross part of consciousness has disappeared. However, there are many cases where the subtle part of the consciousness remains in the person's body for weeks, sometimes even months. But mostly the subtle part of the consciousness leaves the body for 3 or 4 days, during which time the body does not smell or rot. Garge Kamtol Rinpoche: it cannot be determined that a normal person dies. Their consciousness leaves the body 3 days later. Many people stay longer, but others stay shorter. There are many good examples among the Tibetan Lamas. Like Lama Ling Rinpoche, the Dalai Lama's teacher, his consciousness remained in his body for a whole week after passing away. In the Tibetan community, similar cases often occur. In short, cremation or funeral or physical transfer is best done 3 days later. However, today this is difficult to do because people are afraid of pollution, so it is recommended to perform the transfer of consciousness before touching the body of the deceased. Question: in the case of people who die from serious illnesses such as cancer and AIDS, will their consciousness exit the body faster? Garge Kamtol Rinpoche: this is not very certain. Early or late exit does not really depend on whether the deceased had an accident or is seriously ill, but I think it is closely related to the good and bad karma of the deceased. For example, for a person who practices dzogchen or another dharma, after death they continue to visualize their emptiness and consciousness remaining in the body for a long time, even though they cannot fall in love. Love this body of 5 aggregates. Question: can you tell us when the consciousness leaves the body? What signs let us know this clearly? Kyuri Tsenshab Rinpoche. Once again we discuss 2 types of people who leave their bodies after death. Now I will not mention the type of person whose consciousness immediately leaves the body after death, but only the type of person who is somewhat sophisticated, whose consciousness remains in the body for many days. It is said that before the consciousness, when that person escapes from the body, there will be a single hot spot gathered on their body, red or white in color. Wherever the hot spot gathers, the consciousness will escape from that place. For example, if the hot spot converges at the top of the head, we believe that the person will be reborn in a good realm. If the hot spot converges at the feet, the person will certainly fall into the lower world. Signs that when the consciousness leaves the body will be a little blood flowing out of the nostrils or semen escaping from the genitals. However, there are some people who do not see this sign. Those are people who die suddenly from an accident or have heart disease. This sign is only found in people with a slow and long death process. Geshe-lem Rinpa. Most people who die from a serious illness, when their consciousness leaves the body, there are signs of blood or yellow liquid flowing from the nostrils or genitals. When the consciousness escapes, the body smells bad. The 14th Dalai Lama once spoke with famous doctors in the West about the issue of consciousness leaving the body when a patient stops breathing. Doctors tested and said they saw a small white smoke coming out from a certain point on the dead man's body. This result is checked mechanically and carefully physically analyzed. Signs such as drops of blood or yellow liquid all occur in people who die of serious illness. However, the person's body is often moved too much before seeing these signs, so such cases absolutely never happen. In Tibet, it is traditional practice to keep the body for 3, 4, or 7 days, to give the consciousness enough time to leave the body. During this waiting period, prayers for the deceased are conducted in a strictly confidential manner. Garge Kemtol Rinpoche. You can know when the consciousness disembodied from the transformation of the body. When the consciousness still remains in the body, you feel that the person is not really dead, their skin is still unusually fresh and bright, like they are sleeping. But once the consciousness has left the body, we immediately see the body change, the skin becomes dry, turns pale and begins to smell bad. At that moment, you have the feeling that it is a corpse and not a person anymore. The experiences of smoke or drops of blood coming out when the consciousness leaves the body are not always visible, we only see it in a few people. Among these people, when the consciousness leaves the body, golden liquid flows from the nostrils and in the lower body. There was a high-ranking Lama who died, and when his consciousness left his body, 2 streams of liquid flowed from his nostrils, one was red and the other was white. Question: is it true that until the consciousness leaves the body begins to smell bad and show signs of decay? Garge Kemtol Rinpoche. That's the truth. Question: when a person dies but the consciousness still remains in the body, so does that person feel anything if someone else touches them? Geshe-lem Rinpa. They will not feel anything. When the dry part of the consciousness disappears, the person no longer feels anything. For accomplished lamas and practicing Buddhists, when they die, the subtle part of their consciousness remains in the body, so they can stay in the meditation position until their consciousness leaves the body and the body remains. Of him just fell down. Several decades ago, when the first Tibetans came to seek refuge in India's Buksa province, at a Tibetan Buddhist academy, 2 monks fought and 1 died. After that, because of this incident, the Indian government and local people criticized the Tibetan people very harshly, saying that Tibetan monks only know how to kill each other. Later there was a virtuous Lama named Gyari Rinpoche, from Gender Monastery in Tibet, who passed away in India sitting cross-legged for 7 days. Indians were invited to witness the Lama's strange death, and they tried to tug at the sheets to make his body fall, but he still sat upright like a statue, even after 7 days. His body still does not have a bad smell. After this event, their perspective on Tibetan monks has changed completely. They no longer criticize and they let them do whatever they want. Question: if you touch and move the body before the consciousness leaves the body, will it have any effect on the dead person's consciousness? In the hospital, after the dying person stops breathing and the heart stops beating, there are many other procedures that affect the corpse. Is this intervention harmful to the dead person's consciousness? Kyuri Tsenshab Rinpoche: first of all, if it is an expert person, capable of meditating, they try to practice meditation after breathing out. If we shake their body vigorously while they are in a state of meditation, meditating, it will disturb the process of concentrating their consciousness. Therefore, it is best not to touch them physically at that time. Even an ordinary person, a non-practitioner, is not allowed to touch their body until 3 days later. If a person is sleeping soundly, but we shake them vigorously, they will wake up immediately. The same goes for the dead here. When touching them, there is no harm to their body, but great harm to their consciousness. In addition, if we must change the sheets and mattress from the deceased's bed to make it clean, we should do so gently. Similarly, if the deceased still has their eyes and mouth open, ask a family member to come before the body to pay their last respects. Then help them close their eyes and mouth to make it more visible. For people with deformities and crooked limbs, they must be straightened when shrouded to make it easier to put them into the coffin. But every gesture towards the dead person must be gentle and must be 3 days after the person's last breath. Question: is there any benefit when we touch or stimulate the top of the head of the dying and the dead, especially those who have stopped breathing? Garge Kamtol Rinpoche: when a person has just died, we can touch the top of their head. That is the best acupressure area for consciousness to escape, which Lama Je Tsongkhapa called the Golden Gate. Therefore, you should stimulate the top of the head. If the dead person's consciousness escapes through this route, they will certainly be reborn in a peaceful realm. But if consciousness escapes through the lower body, from the navel down, that person will be reborn in evil realms, such as the realm of hungry ghosts or animals. Therefore, Tibetans never come into contact with the lower body of a dead person. If we touch any part of their body, their consciousness will gather there and escape. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche: touching the top of the dying person's head is considered to be performing a consciousness transfer spell for them. Performing this spell is not a simple matter, it must be done carefully to help the dying person's consciousness concentrate at the top of the head, where the hair meets each other, called the Brahma door. If the person's head is not bald, we must pull out 5 or 3 strands of hair above that door, and use our index finger to scrape that area many times. This is to help the dead person's consciousness know where to escape. Outside. This technique also often causes golden liquid to flow from that door, a sign that the consciousness transference has been successful. Time: from the time of death until the time of rebirth. Question: after the consciousness leaves the body and enters the intermediate stage between this life and the next life, how long does it take before this consciousness attaches to a new fetus? Kyuri Tsenshab Rinpoche: the average time it takes for a person to be reborn into a new body is 7 weeks. Every 7 days, the intermediate body dies and is then reborn in another intermediate body, until it makes contact with its future parents before being reborn. However, there are many people who only take 2 seconds after death to be reborn into another realm. The reason why consciousness suffers in the intermediate process. Birth and death, like this devil. Because the person's good and evil karma, the previous life will decide to lead them to the right place, so it takes a certain amount of time to search for a new life. Future: Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche: 49 days is a common time for everyone, but there are some other people who wander in this intermediate world for a very long time, sometimes up to 7 years before being reborn. If they get stuck in this intermediate world, they will become demons. Usually when a person is dying, we say a prayer or reminder, they all hear it, even the unconscious person. For spirits in the intermediate realm, they also have the ability to hear, feel and understand when we read the book, Tibetan Book of the Death, to warn them. Therefore, the first 7 weeks after death is a very important time for the living to do everything that can help regenerate the dead. The consciousness of babies who die before birth, miscarriage, during birth or early childhood, will pass through the intermediate states again and perceive a different existence. Their parents can also perform meritorious acts, to dedicate merit to the spirits or perform dharmas for the dead, such as reciting the 100-syllable Vajrasattva mantra. Mantra of Vajrasattva held Norg, enough quorum of 100 times, offering lamps, giving alms, releasing animals, to help the child's consciousness be gentle and easily find the way to rebirth. Geshe-lam Rinpa, it is impossible to determine the exact time. If a person is not reborn in the human world, they will be reborn in another world without going through the intermediate stage. But in general, a person can stay in the bardo for an average of 49 days, some people stay for 1 day, 4 days, and sometimes 7 days. During their stay in the bardo, the soul searches for a lifetime. Live in the future in accordance with your karma to be reborn, Jurj Kamtol Rinpoche. For some people the longest period is 7 weeks, but there are others who only stay in the bardo for 3 days. Most people must reincarnate after 21 days. Not everyone who dies passes through the intermediate stage. There are some people who practice enlightenment and lead a virtuous and beneficial life. When they die, they are directly reborn in a good realm without going through this intermediate stage. A person who commits the 5 transgressions, killing parents, destroying the Dharma, or leads a negative, evil life, will immediately fall into hell, or some other bad realm, rather than passing through. Intermediate body stage, the Buddhism viewpoint on suicide. Question: please tell us Buddhism's perspective on suicide. Kyuri Tsenshab Rinpoche, for Buddhists, killing oneself is a very big sin. Why? Because having a human body is one of the difficult things and injuring or destroying that body is a huge mistake. Suicide often results from anger. Just being angry at others and not being able to do anything, so they come back and kill themselves. Likewise, for a non-Buddhist, suicide is a reprehensible and sinful act. After death, their consciousness has no other place but to follow their evil karma. So we have to think about how to help them overcome their mental crises and suffering. In a state of confusion, deadlock and despair, this serious crisis can push people to suicide. Garj Kamtol Rinpoche, Buddhism believes that suicide is the worst thing a person can do. This is a negative action that makes it difficult for that person's consciousness to be reborn. According to the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, there are hundreds of gods and goddesses in our bodies. If we commit suicide, we kill them at the same time. According to Mahayana Buddhism, at the foot of each hair there are thousands of other living cells. When we kill ourselves, we also destroy them. Geshe-lam Rinpa, according to Buddhism, suicide is a negative act and causes the person's consciousness to fall into the bad realm. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, when a person commits suicide, their consciousness often has to follow their bad karma. They will most likely be captured by an evil demon and take over their life force. To help these people, qualified teachers must perform many special requiem ceremonies, such as 5 ceremonies and other rituals to transcend the consciousness of the dead. Question: during the war in Vietnam, many monks self-immolated. With the motive of making the world pay attention to the suffering of war in Vietnam. Is their self-immolation a negative act? Geshe-lam Rinpa, Bodhisattvas are allowed to perform some actions that ordinary people consider negative. However, according to Theravada Buddhism, this action is opposed, so suicide is always considered a negative act in this tradition. If you analyze more closely and see what motivated these monks to self-immolate, then we can judge whether it is negative or positive. In a Buddhist scripture, there is a story about a young bhikkhu who was forced by a woman to marry her. This person knows clearly that if he accepts it, he will break the precepts. On the other hand, if she refuses to marry, she will slander her that she has committed bad deeds. Therefore, to resolve this deadlock situation without breaking the precepts, he decided to end his life. Thinking like that, he pretended to agree and told her to wait a bit. He went into the inner room, closed the door and stabbed himself in the throat and died. Before dying, he paid homage to the 3 jewels of the 10 directions and said, "Out of respect for the 3 jewels and keeping the precepts, I have decided to give up this body." The sutra says this is a positive and meritorious action. If it is the case that Vietnamese monks, motivated by the desire to save the dharma of their country and not plunge into war, for such a noble motive, their act of self-immolation cannot be considered negative but must be considered negative. Consider the actions of Bodhisattvas. Question: what is the Buddhist view on ending one's life before death? Patients requested that they be allowed to die naturally without using drugs or other medical methods because they were in too much physical and mental pain and the treatment did not bring results. Garge Kamtul Rinpoche: in this case you obviously want to benefit others, to end their suffering. However, we need to consider carefully and not act without thinking. Because killing a human life is a crime. Therefore, even though the pain is severe, instead of letting them die, try to treat them to the best of your ability, perhaps giving them painkillers or sedatives, for example. On the other hand, remember that a human body is very difficult to obtain. Therefore, healers must think carefully before making this decision. Geshe Lam Rinpa: people should continue treatment to save their lives. If that person dies with an angry, insecure, negative or lethargic state of mind, they will face many difficulties in reincarnation and will be at a disadvantage for their future life. However, it is not appropriate to give them medicine to shorten their lives. Question: what if they sometimes want to die? Geshe Lam Rinpa: they want to die before their time, because they cannot bear the pain in this life. But they don't know that they still have to face that suffering in their next life, so it's better to help them treat it. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche: using machines to prolong the life of someone who has no chance of healing is absurd and horrifying. It's better to let them die naturally in a peaceful atmosphere. When using machines without hope of recovery for the patient, it is not a crime to end treatment with machines. There is clearly no need to artificially prolong their lives. From a Buddhist perspective, we should do whatever we can to help that person cope with the emotional lows in their moments of pain and fear, bringing them peace at the end of life. The problem of physical donation. Question: in the West, donating body parts to a person who has just died is normal. Does this affect or hinder the deceased's consciousness? Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche: the donation of that body was a good thing, because it arose from the motivation of benefiting others with genuine compassion. And once it is the last wish of the dead, it has absolutely no effect or harm on their consciousness when they leave the body. On the contrary, this positive work will contribute to creating good karma for that person in the future life. Garge Kamtul Rinpoche: if a person wants to donate their body, the necessary organs should be taken after the person dies. This has no effect on the process of their consciousness leaving the body and being reborn. Question: there are many cases where parts of the body are removed but their consciousness has not yet left the body. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche: this depends on the compassion and wishes of the deceased. If that person has sincerely expressed that great wish for alms, then the necessary organs can be removed even before the heart stops beating, without any harm to the consciousness. Garge Kamtul Rinpoche: as I said above, the consciousness will leave the body when we touch their corpse. For example, we stimulate the crown of the head to instruct the consciousness to leave. Once the consciousness has come out, you can take away the necessary parts of the body. Therefore, you should pay attention to helping the dead perform the transfer of consciousness before taking their body parts. Question: what about the method of freezing the body after death? Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche: it's completely meaningless, it doesn't bring any benefit. That person's consciousness cannot return to the body once that person has truly died. Preparation for death. Question: what is the best method to prepare for death? Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche: the best way to prepare for one's death is to practice spirituality throughout one's life. Kyuri Tsenshab Rinpoche: once again I have to mention 2 types of people. First are Buddhists, second are non-believers. For the first type of people who have taken refuge and practiced according to the Dharma, when they know that death is coming to them, it is time to help them be more diligent in their practice. For the second type of people, who have never thought about the spiritual path in their lives, they should be advised to try to develop spirituality, spirituality here means thinking about good things, thinking and praying for good things to come to them. Others. This is the best way for non-believers to prepare for death, Garge Kemtol Rinpoche. Just like we go to the dentist, it's inevitable, it has to happen eventually, so does death, so what's better than if we start thinking about it now? To know clearly about death we should ask our masters. Those who have knowledge about death, they will tell us how people will die. If we have such understanding, we really do not fear death and it will help us a lot. Geshe Lem Rinpa. If one is preparing for a happy rebirth, one should eliminate greed, anger and ignorance and purify the 10 negative karmas if committed in the past, express regret and make a vow not to violate the precepts. Future law. This is a general teaching for all living beings. For someone who has taken precepts to practice, or a tantric practitioner, they must repent and purify all the precepts and vows they have broken. On the other hand, if you want to be rich in the next life, you must practice almsgiving. If you want to be happy, you must keep morality. If you want to live a long life, you must avoid killing, and if you want to be admired and respected, you must practice patience. If you want to be liberated, practice the 6 practices of the Bodhisattva, etc. In general, if we eliminate all negative karma, purify all karma and aim for meritorious actions, it will give us a strength of joy. Lost inwardly. When death comes to us, it is the power of merit and virtue that will empower us to go to another safe and happy life. That's the best way to prepare people for death. Question: Buddhism has several methods of meditating on death and the dying process. What are the benefits of this type of meditation? Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. According to Buddhist philosophy, the method of meditating on death is aimed at making us aware of the impermanence of life, and we will become familiar with the different developments of death. Death that humans will have to go through. That's very helpful. In this practice, the practitioner clearly knows the signs that occur in the process leading to death, such as the weakening of the 6 senses, and the gradual disintegration of the body of the 4 elements. Then, we also realize that when we are reborn because of the mixture of our father's sperm, our mother's blood and our consciousness, once again, we see death coming to these 3 things. This process of birth and death does not end until we become enlightened. According to Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, practicing death visualization is a very important practice. Altruism is the heart of Buddhism. Question: Thanks to Buddhism, in recent years in the West there has been a very rapid development of the movement to establish guides to care for those who are about to die. Do you think we can benefit the dead? Garge Kemtol Rinpoche. I think this movement is very good because the people who serve and the people who are cared for know that they will eventually die, so while they are alive in this world they try to do good things. And especially helping those who are about to die. It's like when you're on a plane, knowing you're in the air and feeling scared. But when you see all the amenities around to help you, then you feel like you are at home, you feel happy about it. In short, I find that the guides in the West are very good, because it helps people who are about to die feel safe, confident and not afraid anymore. Kyuri Tsenshab Rinpoche. The idea of establishing hospitals for the dying symbolizes our boundless compassion for the dying. This is a very good movement that I think, the more centers we develop, the better. In the West, we have not paid much attention to spiritual practice, so dying people need spiritual support at the end of their lives, which helps them have the inner strength to overcome the horror of life. Death. Ultimately, the heart of Buddhism is altruism, thinking of others and helping them. We must make more efforts to bring comfort and spiritual support to those people that society once abandoned and lacked care for. From the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you very much to Teacher. The person who conducted this interview is the founder of a travel guide in Australia, and I must say that Teacher, don't think that you are alone with this job. Because everything I am doing now represents a direction of Buddhism in modern times. Buddhas, Bodhisattvas and Dharma protector angels always support and are always on your side.
Thank you for spending your valuable time on my channel journey to enlightenment. Wishing you a very peaceful and happy day. Don't forget to click like and subscribe to my support channel. See you in the next video.